Hello, this is going to be the second video in our video series on how to make a 2D tower defense game. In this video, we are going to go over how to set up a project, how to set up a scene, and get the assets we need for the game. By the end of this video, you should be able to set up your own projects and their respective scenes, create sprites and import game assets you want to use, and learn to create and apply scripts to game objects. Let's begin. The first thing we need to do is make sure Unity is installed. And if you don't have Unity, go find a Unity install video and start from there. Click New Project, make sure 2D Core is selected as a template, and rename the project to the name you want your project to have. For the purposes of the tutorial, we're going to name it 2D Tower Defense Tutorial, and click Create Project. While this is loading, let's do a quick recap on what 2D tower defense games are. These are games that operate in a two-dimensional plane with either side-scroll or top-down view. Tower defense games are classics where players is tasked with defending an objective with towers and traps to stop the enemies from getting to the core. Okay, now before we do anything else, let's first prepare some folders to make sure everything is organized. Let's make a folder for scripts, assets, and prefabs. Okay, now that we have folders, let's start working on the enemies. First thing we need to do is create a sprite. To do that, right-click the hierarchy, 2D object, sprites, then circle. Then change the color to red. Now, let's create a square. Bring it to size, move it in front. This is going to be the face of the model so we know which way it's facing, and make sure it's the child of the circle. Now, how do we make it move? We need to add a 2D rigid body to the circle. Now, if we run the game, our sprite will fall. We have to make the sprite kinematic so that it's not affected with gravity. Now that that's done, we're going to make another circle. This will act as our checkpoint, where our circle will stop if reached. Now, we're going to make a script. Go to the folder script, right-click, create C# script, and now rename it to enemy. We are going to use a serialized field so that we can easily access and change the data in the inspector. We also need to reference the rigid body to the checkpoint. We also need to reference the rigid body to the checkpoint. Now using transform, which accesses the location of the checkpoint. We now need to make a new function called awake, so it run after the object is awake. Now we need to define the rigid body in the script and the velocity for the movement. Let's just make transform a serialized field as well. For now, we are not going to use update, we're going to use fixed update. In order to get the object to move first, we need to find the direction the object is facing. This will determine its moving direction. We also add an update function. In the update function, here we're going to create an if statement, so that if the distance between the object and the checkpoint goes over the checkpoint's position, it tells that the object that it has reached the checkpoint and its velocity turns 0. Now we go back to the project, rename the object to enemy, the square to face, so we can organize a bit in the scene. Attach the script to the enemy object, and then we need to define the checkpoint. Just drag the circle into the checkpoint in the script and hit play. As you can see, the object is moving towards the checkpoint and stops. However, if we change its position a bit, it doesn't look at the checkpoint. So we are going to add a transform right, which is the rotation. Since there is no look at in 2D, we have to improvise. Now we hit play. As you can see, now the object faces the checkpoint. Now, we're going to create a new game object. And name it Enemy Manager. This will handle all the enemy spawns and move it up the hierarchy. Now in the assets folder, we're going to make a new folder called levels. And here, we're going to import our map. Make sure the layers are arranged so that the map stays in the background. Let me just rename some things for better clarity. Next, we create an empty game object and call it background. Here, we put the background image in it. Then, create another object called path, where we put path-related things. Create an empty game object called checkpoint and put it under path. The checkpoint is quite hard to see in the viewport, so we should give it an icon. Now we can see the checkpoint. Place a checkpoint at the start of the path. Now, let's make some more. Copy the checkpoint and paste the next point down the path, where the enemy is expected to make a turn, like so. Just keep adding points until the end of the path. Looks good. Now it's time to give the checkpoints some functionality. Assign the starting checkpoint to be the spawn point. And the final checkpoint as the endpoint. Next, we create a script and call it Enemy Manager. Now we open the script. First, we have to create an array of transform for the checkpoints. This is how we put the checkpoints into the manager later. Now we need to create an awake function. Before we type into the awake function, let's add public static enemy manager main. Okay, now inside the awake function, we put main equals. This is so that it can be called by other objects in the scene. And we're done. Now let's update the enemy script. Let's delete this serialized field because we don't need it anymore. In the start function, we set the checkpoint to enemy manager.main.checkpoint so that it automatically sets the first checkpoint on start. Same thing on the update function so that the checkpoint changes along the way. This will make the enemy proceed to the next checkpoint in its index. Check back in the place where we typed the debug log and replace it with index++. This makes the enemy aim for the next checkpoint every time it hits a checkpoint. Next, we need a way for the enemy to exit the map once it reaches the end. To do this, let's give it a condition. If the index goes over the length of the checkpoint array, it will destroy itself. That should be all for our enemy script. Now let's head back to Unity. Great, we're almost done here. All we need to do is select all the checkpoints under the path and drag it over to the enemy checkpoints. Hopefully, all of your checkpoints are in order when you do this. If ever your enemy starts skipping some checkpoints, just rearrange them in the scene. Finally, it's time to test everything. The enemy follows the path as expected. In the next video, we'll be talking about the variety and spawning of enemies. Hope to see you there soon. Thanks for watching.